All right, everyone. Welcome back to the land of chem. I am your host and the author. My name is Jeffrey Drum. Thank you all so much for joining me again. All right, everyone, welcome back. This is episode 34, Carbon Dioxide and the Bent Pyramid of Dashur. So if you haven't realized, the intention of the Land of Chem here on YouTube is not only to present my theory about the function of the Egyptian pyramids, but it is also to provide you with some supplemental material that will facilitate your understanding of the lessons contained within the Land of Chem book. So here on this channel, I've presented animations, diagrams, and other research that has supported my theory that the Egyptian pyramids are designed to produce chemicals on an industrial scale. So in previous episodes, I've showed research from that German engineering team that developed the animation showing the activation of the Great Pyramid's northern pump shaft. I've also shared research from the Geopolymer Institute in France describing the utilization of chemistry to produce artificial stones. So in today's episode, I'm finally going to reveal some research that I discovered back in 2018 that was produced by a Russian research group that describes the lower chamber of the Bent Pyramid of Dashur being a furnace generator for the production of carbon dioxide gas. And I find this theory to be highly compelling, so I wanted to present it to you here in today's episode. To all of the viewers here on the Land of Chem channel, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click that little notification bell so that you get noticed whenever the videos premiere. If you like the video, leave it a like. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, leave that in the comment section below. I think that is it for today's intro. So without further ado, let's get right to it. All right, everyone, here we go with tonight's episode. So in my previous video entitled The Primary Reaction Chamber of the Bent Pyramid, I mentioned that I had some additional research to present regarding the discovery of significantly elevated levels of carbon dioxide found inside of the reaction chambers of the Bent Pyramid. And here on this picture, you can see the carbon dioxide meter that was taken inside of the Bent Pyramid by the ACITA project in their 2012 research expedition inside of this structure. You can see that the concentration of carbon dioxide inside of this structure is 717 parts per million, which is significantly elevated for a structure that is completely unoccupied and that has plentiful airflow inside of the chamber. So today's episode begins with this 2012 research expedition conducted by the Russians from the ACITA project, and they were able to gain access inside of the Bent Pyramid before this structure was officially reopened to the public. So the structure was officially reopened in 2020. I had my first opportunity to go inside of the structure during my visit in 2020. However, about 8 years prior, the ACITA project was able to gain private access inside of the Bent Pyramid, and all of the photos that I'm going to be presenting today of the chimney chamber are from that research expedition, and I highly recommend you check out their website. They are one of the most prolific research organizations that focus on the Egyptian pyramids that I have discovered to date. So you can see a couple of pictures here of the ACITA project investigating the chimney chamber found inside of the lower system of the Bent Pyramid. And you can see that they were using planks of wood stacked on the rocks inside of this chamber to gain access into this component. However, when we went in there in 2020 and 2020 filled with rocks, preventing anyone from gaining access into this particular area. So you can see that they were able to gain access into this little chimney chamber, and the chimney will be the focus of our discussion for today's episode. And these are just a few more pictures from that 2012 research expedition conducted by the ACITA project. And here's a few images from inside of that chimney chamber. And I'm going to be describing their proposition for the function of this chamber here in just a moment. And this is another interesting feature found inside of the Bent Pyramid, which I'll be discussing again here in just a moment. You can see the thick layer of salty material. It is an extrusion or deposit of salt that is on top of the limestone inside of this chamber, and I'll be discussing that again here in just a moment. And this is a picture from my first opportunity inside of the Bent Pyramid during my 2020 research expedition. And you can see that the entrance to this chimney chamber has now been almost completely filled with rocks, making it almost impossible for anyone to get up in there and conduct any research on this particular component. All right, here is an exceptional three-dimensional diagram of the bent pyramid of Dashur, and in today's episode, we're going to be discussing this lower chamber section here, specifically a component called the chimney, which is attached to the upper chamber of the lower separation chamber system, and you can see that right here on this diagram. So keep in mind that this ancillary chamber is referred to as the chimney by conventional archaeologists and Egyptologists. So everyone is in agreement that this chamber is called a chimney. Well, I was under the impression that this was a pharaonic burial structure, and for what purpose would a burial tomb include a chimney? Well, we're going to be discussing that here in just a moment. And coming up, I'm going to insert a few videos, first from the Asita Project's 2012 research expedition, and second from my 2021 research expedition, so that you can see exactly what it's like to be inside of the bent pyramid of Dashur. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are down inside the bent pyramid of Dashur, and just made it down the northern pump shaft. And we're going to turn around here and looking at your lower separation chamber. And you can see the extreme deterioration of the inside of this portion of the structure, the erosion of the blocks in this area. And I provided an explanation for exactly why that erosion could have been occurring in my video on the function of the bent pyramid. And let me do my best here to get this video climbing into the upper separation chamber. All right. Whew. It is no small task getting inside here. This is one of my favorite structures in Egypt. And looking up towards the vault of the upper separation chamber. This is a blocked off portion of the chamber referred to as the chimney. And yes, that was a bat flying by me. And stay tuned for more. It is, again, quite a lot of work to get up this next staircase and into the primary reaction chamber. But at least you can get a sense of what it's like in here. This pyramid is newly open to the public. So this is my second opportunity to get inside of here. But first opportunity to do some real documentation of the structure. All right, so here it is, ladies and gentlemen, the article that I discovered back in 2018 after I returned from my first trip to Egypt in 2017. So after this first experience in Egypt, I started to develop the theory that the Egyptian pyramids were designed to produce chemicals on an industrial scale. So when I returned home from Egypt, I began researching any connection that I could find between the chemicals that I was referencing and the Egyptian pyramids. So of course I started Googling methane and the step pyramid, ammonia and the red pyramid, carbon dioxide and the bent pyramid, and I began to discover that there were some legitimate research articles that connected these chemicals to these structures. And this is what I found, again, back in 2018, an article discussing carbon dioxide as related to the bent pyramid of Seneferu. However, when I found this article, I quickly realized that the entire thing was written in Russian, and the only thing that was translated at that time was the abstract, which I will read to you now. So the title of the article is as follows: Egypt Dashur, an ancient carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide gas generator discovered on the lower level of the bent pyramid of Seneferu. So this article researches the design and purpose of the lower tier chamber in the bent pyramid of Seneferu in Dashur. The review of the earlier archaeological research material has shown that the purpose of this chamber has not been determined. In the process of the current research, a technological link between the lower and upper tiers of the pyramid has been found. It has been proven that the lower tier elements, the chamber itself, the shaft, and the chimney, all together comprise an ancient furnace, a carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide gas generator. Its purpose was to produce a mixture of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide gas to fill the space of the upper tier of the pyramid. The goal of the architect was to make the pyramid chambers deadly for burglars. Constructive similarities between the furnace and the lower tier chamber of the pyramid of Seneferu and a modern CO2 gas generator have been established. A theory about the presence of secret chambers in the pyramid, including a chamber containing the sarcophagus of the pharaoh, has been substantiated, and a theory explaining the purpose of changing the shape of construction has also been proposed. So that is a brief synopsis of this article, and when I found this back in 2018, I just thought that it was relatively interesting. They were also proposing that there was carbon dioxide inside of the bent pyramid, which was directly related to my theory that carbon dioxide was being utilized inside of the bent pyramid for the production of ammonium bicarbonate by combining that carbon dioxide with the ammonia that was being produced in the red pyramid. I also didn't have a chance to translate this entire article. However, I pulled this up the other day when I was putting together my video about the primary reaction chamber of the bent pyramid. And I took this article with me to lunch because one of the servers at my favorite restaurants is a Russian lady, and I was going to get her to translate some of the diagrams and pictures that were in this article because I found it very, very interesting, and I wanted to present the full research article here on the Land of Chem YouTube channel. So I was sitting at lunch the other day looking through this article, and I started to realize that there were some very interesting details that were included in this article. So I started to see all of these diagrams, and I recognized the diagrams as coming directly from the research produced by the ACITA project. And then I started to read through this article, and I noticed chemical formulas. Like here, you will see NH3 referring to ammonia. And here you will see CH4 referring to methane. And I immediately knew that I had to translate this article. And as soon as I got home that afternoon, that is what I spent the remainder of the evening doing, which was meticulously and time-stakingly copying and pasting this entire Russian research article into Google Translate so that I could get a full translation of the article. And that is what we have here. So at this point, I'm just going to walk you through some of the research that is presented in this article. And as we move forward, I will also present my conclusions as related to their research. So the first thing are the elements of the furnace and their comparison to the components of this lower tier system compared to the components of a furnace in a chimney system. So the lower chamber is a stoker room with fuel combined with a firebox, a stove, and a chimney pipe. Additional convincing evidence that this is the furnace, there is a shaft under the firebox which serves as an ash pan, and I'm going to point that out here in just a moment. There is indeed an unexcavated shaft below this chimney chamber. So one of the questions they propose, if this is an ash pan, why did the builders not provide a device for cleaning it? Since it is not possible to clean this mine from ash, it turns out that the furnace is intended only for one-time use. They also go into detail describing how this is a manually operated system, and they describe exactly how the system was operated, and whether the builders knew it or not, such a stoker should also work as a reverse refrigerator. Hot air rose to the ceiling and cooled down. So I'm not sure exactly what they're implying regarding this reverse refrigerator. This may be an error in translation that comes up on Google Translate. I'm not exactly sure what the technical name of this device that they're implying, but again, they have some very, very interesting research that has connected this lower system in the chimney chamber to being a furnace for the production of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide gases. All right, here is a diagram of that lower chamber system, and the component that they are referring to in this research article is located here, called the chimney. And they are proposing that this chimney was in fact a furnace designed to fill the upper chamber filled with carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide gas. So this furnace would have been loaded with your combustible material here. That material would have been ignited. Those gases would have risen up through the chimney. The chimney was connected into the primary chamber to fill that primary chamber with those toxic gases. Here beneath the chimney, you can see that unexcavated shaft system that they are proposing would have functioned as your ash pan for the collection of the ashes from that combusted material. And let's go back a couple of slides to the diagram that shows exactly what they are proposing was located inside of this chimney. So you can see here, this would have been your ash pan, the unexcavated shaft below the chamber. Your combustible material would have been loaded into that furnace. Rising up through the chimney would have been your carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide gases. And in this article, they are proposing that this chimney was only intended to function one time. So when I discovered this article back in 2018, I did a little bit of investigation into this proposition, and I find it to be highly compelling. There are several things that I disagree with regarding this conclusion. However, it is directly compatible with my theory that there was carbon dioxide inside of the bent pyramid. However, my theory would propose that the carbon dioxide was utilized as a reactant combined with the ammonia solution for the production of a solid compound fertilizer, which was ammonium bicarbonate. So there are two things that are very compatible with these theories. And I am certainly not opposed to the idea that this lower chamber system could have been a carbon dioxide furnace to increase the amount of carbon dioxide that was being initiated into that primary reaction chamber. So in my theory, I propose that the carbon dioxide involved in the reaction in the primary reaction chamber comes from the byproduct of the production of ammonia within the red pyramid. However, if there was an additional system to increase the volume of carbon dioxide being initiated into that primary reaction chamber, it would certainly make a lot of sense. However, I think that there was a different function for this lower chamber system, and we'll get to that in a later video. I just want to present all of the research and conclusions that were developed by this Russian research team in today's video. So the ultimate conclusion of this Russian research team is that the lower chamber chimney and furnace system of the bent pyramid was designed as a system of protection against robbers, a very intricate booby trap intended to fill all of the upper built chambers of this new pyramid with a mixture of toxic gases, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide. However, they also come to the conclusion that there's a significant problem with this theory, which is ensuring the tightness of all the rooms after filling them with these gases. And I'm going to get to that here in just a moment. All right, so here is a composite diagram showing the upper and lower reaction chambers of the bent pyramid. And again, a synopsis of this theory is that the lower chamber system was designed as a furnace for one-time use that was intended to completely fill this upper chamber with carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide gas as a very involved booby trap to defend against burglars. However, I highly disagree with this conclusion. There is an immense amount of engineering that went into the construction of this lower chamber system, and this research group is implying that this system was completely abandoned in the construction of the bent pyramid. These pyramids were erected one layer at a time. And if the bent pyramid was abandoned or left unfinished, they never would have proceeded with applying all of the casing stones all the way up to the top of the monument. That is the absolute last detail of construction when finishing the pyramids, which is an indication that the bent pyramid was 100% completed. So in regard to the sealing of these chambers to contain all of the carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide gas, this is what the Russian research group proposes. So to this end, the entire lower tier is cut into the bedrock. However, these plans were not destined to come true. During one of the strongest floods of the Nile, the entire lower tier, including the base of the pyramid, was completely flooded with water. The situation was aggravated by channels from the Nile, through which blocks of limestone were delivered directly to the lifting devices of the pyramid. So a couple of very interesting things to note about this statement. So first and foremost, they suggest that there was water utilized in the construction of the Egyptian pyramids. And I've had a long-standing theory that goes directly in conjunction with this idea that the stones utilized in the pyramids were floated on water directly to the construction site, and then they utilized a combination of lifting devices and physics, i.e. A-frames, pulleys, block and tackles, etc., to lift these stones into the appropriate place. And if you guys are interested, I can put together a video containing all of the research that I've discovered regarding the construction of the Egyptian pyramids. This typically isn't my thing. I'm more interested in what was going on inside the structures, but I do certainly have some ideas about how they built these structures. If you all are interested, just let me know in the comment section below. So long story short, they are proposing that part of the pyramid sank. The central core was especially affected in this regard. So inevitably, the bent pyramid would be abandoned. So after this flood, D. Paring and several other researchers suggest that there were attempts to repair the defects that had occurred inside of this structure, particularly plastering of the walls of the lower chamber. However, the necessary tightness was not achieved. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the biggest disagreement I have with this theory, is that this group is attempting to attribute work that is done by the dynastic Egyptians with the work that was done by the civilization that built these monuments. They are not the same thing, and this is the biggest mistake made by this Russian research group, is associating the plaster and some of the work that was clearly done by the dynastic Egyptians to the original construction itself. So they propose that after the damage occurring inside of the structure and their inability to repair it, they decided that the pharaoh was just going to build another pyramid for himself, the Red Pyramid of Dashur. So this brings me to one of the most interesting discoveries that I have made regarding the interior components of the bent pyramid. So I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this thick extrusion of salt or deposit of salt that has formed on top of the limestone composing the chamber walls inside of the bent pyramid. And I'll show you a couple of images of this salt extrusion or salt deposit. So you can see here in this image on the left, this darker brown area is completely covered with a thick deposit of that salt. So it's either a deposit or it's an extrusion that is coming out from inside of the stone. Here on the right side, this side is not covered whatsoever with that salt deposit. So here in the picture on the right, you can see the mortar and the plaster that is being referred to in this research article. And you will see this pink mortar all over Egypt. This is dynastic Egyptian mortar or plaster. So I'm going to make a couple of comments. This plaster and mortar in absolutely no way whatsoever could seal these chambers. That is an absolute fallacy that they are implying that the dynastic Egyptians were using this mortar to try to seal these chambers. This mortar was applied much, much later by the dynastic Egyptians when they rediscovered and intended to repurpose this structure. So you can see that the plaster layer is on top of the salt extrusion. And I was discussing this exact feature with a geologist recently, and we both agreed that the extrusion of salt that has formed on these chamber walls would take a significant amount of time to form. Now, we're not talking about geological time in hundreds of thousands of years, but this thick layer of salt is not something that forms quickly. So what does this imply, ladies and gentlemen? That the chamber walls were installed first. You will see that if you go inside of the bent pyramid, this thick salt layer covers over the gaps and the joints in the stone, which means that the stones were laid first. the salt extrusion or salt deposit occurred later, and then the plaster was applied by the dynastic Egyptians. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the greatest indications that I can provide that the chamber itself was constructed first. There was a significant amount of time that lapsed to allow this thick extrusion of salt to develop. After that salt extrusion had already formed on the chamber walls, then the dynastic Egyptians come around and start putting this mortar around. So that is the first disagreement that I have with this Russian research conclusions, is that they are attributing work that is done by the dynastic Egyptians to the original construction itself, and I believe that those are two separate things. So here's another picture of that salt extrusion or salt deposit that has formed on the walls of the lower chamber of the bent pyramid. In my discussions with this geologist, we both came to the conclusion that for this salt layer to form, there had to be moisture inside of this chamber. So that goes back directly to what the Russian research group was implying, is that there was a flood inside of this lower chamber system. However, that does not explain the unusual pattern of this salt extrusion or salt formation. It is very, very clear delineation between the area that has a salt deposit and the area that does not have the salt deposit. However, if you look closely at this picture, you can see tiny little chisel marks all here around the edge of this salt, which looks like it has been removed from the walls of this chamber, perhaps by the dynastic Egyptians when they came back around, rediscovered the structure, started applying plaster to the walls, and beginning with their reconstruction and repurposing of this monument for a pharaonic burial. So in the next section of this article, they begin to discuss the Red Pyramid of Dashur, and at this point, they're describing the pharaoh examining the finished Red Pyramid. And the pharaoh drew his attention to two unpleasant circumstances. They were accompanied by the smell of ammonia throughout the pyramid. This smell has not disappeared for more than 4 millennia and is still present. You can imagine how sharp it was at that time. In addition, incomprehensible and therefore disgusting black streaks of some substance appeared on the walls of the cells. So any of you that have been following my research here on the Land of Chem YouTube channel know that I have discussed in detail the intense smell of ammonia and the staining that is found covering the walls of the interior chambers of the Red Pyramid of Dashur. And when I began to translate this article, I stumbled across this, and it almost made me jump out of my seat, so I will read it to you literally right now. So far, no one has been able to explain these oddities observed in the pyramid, referencing the staining inside of the chambers and the intense smell of ammonia. I will name only the most popular version regarding the explanation of these oddities. All the leaks are the excrement of bats. However, they took swabs, referring to the Asida project in their research expedition from 2012. So they took swabs, scrapings from these spots, analyzed them in professional laboratories. The result is almost the entire periodic table. So after translating this article, I immediately contacted the Asida project to see if I could get in touch with them and begin exchanging research. So I will keep you posted if there is any progress made on that attempt. So they also make a statement in this article that I have been preaching since day one regarding the Red Pyramid. And they are saying here that there is an argument that completely refutes this version. The explanation that the smell and the staining inside of this chamber are from the excrement of bats. In the bent pyramid, as in other pyramids of Egypt, where you actually find bats, this is not observed. And as I've shown in my research expedition into Mastaba 17 in my Doom, all of the other structures in Egypt where you find bats, there is zero staining on the walls, and there is absolutely no smell of ammonia. This is a picture from inside of Mastaba 17. You can see a few of the bats that were inside of this chamber, but there's probably 100 bats inside of this little chamber. There is zero staining on any of the walls inside of this chamber, and there is absolutely no smell of ammonia inside of Mastaba 17. So, in examining these old photos from inside of the Red Pyramid, let's propose that there was an absolutely immense colony of bats that once inhabited these inner chambers. You would suspect that if that were the case, the floors of these chambers would be completely covered with the same black excrement streaks that are covering the walls of the upper chamber. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to take a look at this picture here on the left, which was taken before the restoration of these chambers. These blocks had not even been set back into place, nor had the wooden floor inside of these chambers been constructed. Take a look at these blocks, ladies and gentlemen. Where are the black excrement streaks? Where are the stains? Not one single drop. Ladies and gentlemen, I rest my case. So in regard to the black streaks and stains found inside of the red pyramid, this research team proposes that this is a result of microscopic inclusions of the remains of microorganisms found inside of those limestone blocks. And under the significant pressure created by the mass of stones above these chambers, those inclusions of microorganisms were squeezed out of the stone. They diffused toward lower pressure, extruding out of the stone and leaving the black streaks inside of the chamber walls. And I've heard a similar explanation given to me before by Yusuf that was given to him by geologist Susan Moore, explaining the staining on the casing stones outside of the bent pyramid, again giving this geological pressure extrusion explanation for those streaks. However, I somewhat disagree with this geological explanation, mostly because it does not explain the unusual patterns found inside of the red pyramid. It does not explain why the black nebulous staining in the upper vault of those chambers starts precisely at the third tier, nor does it explain the fluid dynamic patterns found in those stains. Also, I would say that the result of the chemical analysis taken from those samples from inside of the red pyramid, the fact that those results contain almost the entire periodic table, is a direct indication that this is not bat excrement. This is not geological microscopic inclusions squeezing out of the stone. This is something much more than that, ladies and gentlemen, and the stains in the red pyramid are a direct result of the chemical reactions that were occurring inside of that structure. So the remainder of the article discusses how the construction plans were inevitably adjusted to account for the damage that happened in the original building of the structure. So they propose that this lower chamber system was completely abandoned. They moved on to building the upper chamber system. They had intended for all of this thing to be completely hermetically sealed. However, after the damage, they realized they were not able to completely seal the chamber. They also make some explanation for the drafts found inside of the pyramid, because again, they're implying that the furnace chamber system of the lower chamber system was connected through ducts or shafts into that upper primary reaction chamber. They propose that during an earthquake in Egypt, the tightness of the plugs in the vents was broken, and now the drafts that we see in there today are flowing freely through these channels that were intended to connect this chimney system here into your upper primary reaction chambers. So ladies and gentlemen, my assessment of the research produced by this Russian team, I find it to be highly compelling, and there is definitely a connection between my research that the bent pyramid was utilizing carbon dioxide as a reactant here in the primary reaction chamber, and this group's proposition that the lower chamber chimney was utilized as a furnace for the production of carbon dioxide. And I'm certainly not opposed to the idea that these two theories could be combined, that this upper primary reaction chamber was filled with the ammonia solution being produced in the red pyramid. This lower chamber system could have then been a furnace for the production of that carbon dioxide gas, which would be percolated up through this ammonia solution for the production of ammonium bicarbonate. However, I disagree with that because there is no indication inside of this chimney chamber that it was ever used as a furnace. There is no soot, there is no fire, there are no burn marks whatsoever inside of this lower chamber system. And that's kind of what this Russian research group is saying, is that it was only intended as a furnace and a chimney. It was never used because this lower chamber was abandoned. However, I go back to my original statement that the bent pyramid is absolutely not an unfinished structure. It was finished and it was functional, and they absolutely used this for the production of chemicals. Just look at the erosion on the inside of the primary reaction chamber. This was not done in the reconstruction of this chamber by the dynastic Egyptians. They wouldn't have gone in and destroyed the beautifully tiered upper vault and smoothed it out for the construction of the platform that we now found in that chamber. So just a note about the construction of the Egyptian pyramids that I mentioned earlier. These structures go up one layer at a time. So in regard to the construction of the bent pyramid, your first task is excavating and building your lower chamber systems. This system would have to be completely finished before you install your first ground layer of stones. So to imply that the chimney chamber was abandoned or left unfinished is absolute fallacy. The next step is applying your first ground layer of stones. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, that the intent of these pyramids had to be erected while the layers of stone were being erected. You don't build this thing first and then go in and land it, nor do you lay the stone and then go back and drill tunnels or holes into your stone. Everything goes up at the exact same time. So, ladies and gentlemen, if this was an unfinished structure, they never would have finished going all the way up to the top and casing this thing. This indicates completion of the monument, because if something had happened in the construction process and this structure had to be abandoned, they never would have gone through the process of adding layer after layer after layer of stone and the casing stones to get all the way up to the top and finish the pyramid. This was a finished structure. So anyone who implies that there were mistakes made during the construction of the bent pyramid, the shape was accidental, or that somehow this structure was abandoned or left finished, do not understand the construction process of how these monuments were erected, nor do they understand the original intention of these structures, which was not for pharaonic burials, but it was for the production of chemicals on an industrial scale. Specifically within the bent pyramid, they were producing a solid fertilizer compound known as ammonium bicarbonate. More to come on that in a later video. So what is my opinion of the research conducted by this Russian team proposing that the lower chamber system and chimney of the bent pyramid are a furnace generator system intended for the production of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide to fill the upper primary reaction chamber, booby-trapping it for the pharaonic burial? Well, I find this theory to be highly compelling, and it's one of the most interesting theories that connects a proposed function for these unusual and often completely ignored chambers of the Egyptian pyramids to the pharaonic burial theory. However, I think that is one of their biggest mistakes, is connecting the function of these structures to the pharaonic burial process. Ladies and gentlemen, these are not intended to bury pharaohs. These are functional machines intended for the production of chemicals on an industrial scale. And I think if they had integrated the function of the CO2 furnace generator into a more industrial process, I think it would be certainly more applicable to how these structures were originally used. So as we proceed here on the Land of Chem YouTube channel, I will continue to present research, whether it contradicts or corroborates my theory that the Egyptian pyramids were designed to produce chemicals on an industrial scale. If I find it interesting and applicable to the function of these structures, I will share it with you here on this channel. Namely because at the end of the day, all of the alternative theories about the function of the Egyptian pyramids are pure speculation. What we are doing is taking the knowledge and technology that we have today in an attempt to reverse engineer these miraculous structures. And every individual that has attempted to do so has come up with the exact same conclusion, that these structures were functional. And ladies and gentlemen, if you think my theories and research are compelling, that these pyramids were producing chemicals, the step pyramid producing methane, the red pyramid producing ammonia, the bent pyramid here in Dashur producing ammonium bicarbonate, and the pyramids of Giza producing hydrochloric and sulfuric acids. Ladies and gentlemen, that is just the tip of the iceberg. We have barely scratched the surface of what these structures are truly capable of, so just stay tuned. And just a quick reminder that limited first edition print copies of the Land of Chem book are now available at www.thelandofchem.com. So if you want to help support the channel, just go to the website. You can pick up a copy of the book, grab yourself a t-shirt. Either way, all the orders mean the world to me. So thank you all so much in advance. All right, everyone, that is it for today's video. This was episode 34, Carbon Dioxide and the Bent Pyramid of Dashur. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. To all of the viewers, if you're not already, please subscribe to the Land of Chem here on YouTube and click that little notification bell so you get noticed whenever the videos premiere. If you like the video, leave it a like. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, leave that in the comment section below. If you want to pick up a copy of the book, my website is thelandofchem.com. You can follow me on Instagram at thelandofchem. To all of the viewers and supporters of the channel, thank you all so much. I do this for you. I hope you're enjoying the material. I think that is it for today's episode, so I will see you next time.